Forget toasters and towels. Medieval wedding gifts could get seriously strange. Imagine your in-laws showing up with a live bear. Yes, a literal breathing bear, as a token of their affection. Or picture this: your brand new, super expensive marriage bed becoming a stage for a public ceremony where folks, including a priest, would tuck you in and then, well, sometimes they'd stick around to make sure the marriage was, shall we say, officially started. Some brides even received sharp, pointy daggers, not just as pretty accessories, but as something they might actually use. And you thought your cousin's handmade macaroni picture frame was an odd gift. Number 7. The grand marriage bed and its very public display. Okay, so getting a bed as a wedding gift might not sound that unusual. After all, newlyweds need a place to, sleep. But in medieval times, a grand marriage bed wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a statement, a symbol, and often the most valuable single object a household owned. And the ceremonies surrounding it? Those could get pretty public. First, let's talk about the bed itself. We're not talking about a simple frame and mattress. For wealthier families, especially nobility and rich merchants, the marriage bed was an elaborate affair. Think a massive 4-poster bed, often made of heavy carved oak or other expensive woods. These weren't just for sleeping. They were designed to impress. The posts could be intricately carved with family crests, religious scenes, or symbols of fertility like fruits and vines. Some even had painted panels or inlaid work with precious materials. Then came the hangings. These weren't just pretty curtains. They were crucial for both privacy, eventually, and warmth in drafty medieval castles and manors. The fabrics could be incredibly luxurious. Rich velvets, silks brocaded with gold or silver thread, or heavy wool tapestries. The colors were often vibrant, deep reds, blues, and greens, and the hangings might be embroidered with yet more symbolic imagery. Sumptuary laws which dictated what different social classes could wear and own sometimes even extended to bed furnishings, meaning the quality of your bed hangings could be a direct indicator of your social standing. Owning such a bed was a clear sign that you had arrived, or that your family was investing heavily in your new life, and importantly, the continuation of their lineage. In wills from the period, the best bed was often the first item listed, bequeathed with great care, highlighting its immense value both materially and sentimentally. Now, for the very public display part. The wedding celebrations didn't just end with the feast. A key ritual in many parts of medieval Europe, especially for the upper classes, was the bedding ceremony. This wasn't a quiet, private moment for the newlyweds. Oh, no! After the feasting, drinking, and dancing, the bride and groom would be escorted to their bedchamber by a procession of guests, often including family members, friends, and even clergy. Imagine the scene. Minstrels might still be playing, people laughing and joking, as the couple is led to this magnificent bed, which itself might have been a prominent wedding gift from the bride's or groom's parents. A priest would often be present to bless the marriage bed, sprinkling it with holy water and praying for the couple's fertility and happiness. This blessing was considered vital, a way to sanctify the space where heirs would hopefully be conceived. In some traditions, guests would help the bride and groom undress, or at least remove some symbolic outer garments. This wasn't necessarily seen as intrusive, but as a communal affirmation of the marriage. Once the couple was in bed, often propped up against pillows. The guests might offer them spiced wine, known as a posset, or other refreshments. And there could be more songs, jokes, and well wishes. And then what? Well, get varied. In many cases, after a suitable period of this public tucking in, the guests would finally depart, leaving the couple to themselves. However, for very high status, marriages, particularly royal ones where the continuation of a dynasty was paramount, the witnessing could be more direct. There was an intense societal pressure to ensure the marriage was consummated, as an unconsummated marriage could potentially be annulled. So, sometimes a few chosen witnesses, usually trusted family members or high-ranking officials, might remain in the room or just outside a curtain until they were satisfied that the marriage had indeed been physically completed. This wasn't about voyeurism in the modern sense. It was about legal and dynastic security. The birth of a legitimate heir was crucial for political stability and the transfer of property and titles. So, the marriage bed as a gift was far more than just furniture. It was a loaded symbol of wealth, status, family alliance, and a profound hope for future generations. It was the centerpiece of the new household and the very public, ritually charged, beginning of a new life together. The bed itself, with its rich materials and craftsmanship, represented a significant investment, while the ceremonies surrounding its first use by the couple underscored the community's stake in the marriage. It was a gift that kept on giving, both in terms of its practical use and its powerful symbolic weight within medieval society. Number 6. A single fancy shoe, more than just footwear. Receiving a single shoe as a wedding gift today might get you some seriously confused looks, or maybe a worried call to see if you've lost the other one. But back in medieval times, a single particularly fancy shoe, or sometimes a pair given with specific intent, could be a deeply symbolic and significant wedding present. It wasn't about keeping your feet warm necessarily. It was about power, authority, and the transfer of property, or even the bride herself. Footwear in the medieval period, like everything else, was a marker of status. The poor might go barefoot or wear simple leather turn shoes or wooden clogs. The wealthy, however, could sport shoes made from fine leather, silk, velvet, or brocade, sometimes embroidered with gold thread or even adorned with small gems. The styles changed over the centuries, from the practical to the absurdly long-toed cracos or poulaines that nobles wore in the later Middle Ages, so long, in fact, that the tips sometimes had to be tied to the wearer's garters to prevent tripping. A gift of a shoe, therefore, especially an ornate one, was already a gift of value. But the real kicker was the symbolism. One of the most potent meanings associated with shoes was the transfer of authority or ownership. You might have heard the phrase, "to step into someone's shoes," meaning to take over their role or position. This idea has ancient roots. In some cultures, exchanging or handing over a shoe was part of a legal transaction, a bit like signing a contract today. For example, the Book of Ruth in the Old Testament mentions a custom in Israel where, to confirm a transaction concerning redemption and exchange, one man would take off his sandal and give it to the other. This was a recognized form of attestation. This concept carried into medieval wedding customs in various ways. In some Anglo-Saxon traditions, for instance, there was a practice where the father of the bride would hand over one of her shoes to the groom. The groom might then symbolically tap the bride on the head with it. This wasn't usually an act of aggression, but was understood as a symbolic transfer of the father's authority over his daughter to her new husband. The shoe, in this context, represented the bride herself, or the authority being passed. It was a tangible sign that she was moving from one household and one male authority figure to another. Sometimes, a pair of new, beautiful shoes would be part of the bride's trousseau, the collection of goods she brought into the marriage. These might be gifted by her family. In this case, they were both a practical item of high value and a symbol of her readiness to step into her new life. The quality and richness of these shoes would reflect her family's wealth and status. There were also regional folk customs involving shoes and weddings that hinted at their symbolic power. For example, in some areas, shoes might be thrown after the departing wedding couple for good luck, a tradition that some say has echoes even today in tying old shoes to the back of a wedding car. While not a direct gift to the couple, it shows the shoe's connection to marital rights and good fortune. Imagine a bride receiving a single slipper, perhaps made of delicate silk, dyed a vibrant crimson, embroidered with pearls, and with a soft leather sole. It's too precious for everyday wear. This wouldn't be a gift chosen lightly. It might have been presented by her father with a solemn look, or by her new husband as a sign of her new position within his household. The very act of giving and receiving such an item was laden with unspoken understanding about roles, responsibilities, and the new social order being established by the marriage. Beyond authority, shoes could also be associated with fertility and good fortune in the new home. The specific design or decoration on a gifted shoe might even carry these connotations. While historical records don't always detail the exact emotions or interpretations of every gift, the repeated appearance of shoes in significant life rituals, particularly weddings, tells us they were far more than just protection for the feet. They were symbolic vessels carrying messages of social transition, legal standing, and the hopes and expectations tied to marriage. So if you were a medieval bride or groom presented with a shoe, you'd understand it wasn't just a quirky present, it was a serious business. Number 5. A jeweled pomander, your personal air freshener. If you think dealing with unpleasant smells is a modern problem, imagine living in a medieval town or castle. With limited sanitation, open sewers in some places, and a general lack of daily bathing for many, the air could be fragrant, and not in a good way. This is where a rather lovely and unusual wedding gift comes in. The pomander. This wasn't just a medieval clique plogjock. It was a sophisticated, often beautiful, and highly personal item that offered a little bubble of pleasant scent in a pungent world, and it was also thought to ward off disease. So, what exactly was a pomander? The name comes from the French pomme d'ambre, meaning apple of ambergris. Ambergris, a waxy substance from sperm whales, was a highly prized aromatic, but pomanders could contain a variety of fragrant ingredients. Essentially, a pomander was a small container, usually spherical or apple-shaped, designed to hold these aromatics. The containers themselves could be quite plain, made of wood or simple metal, but for a wedding gift, especially among the well-to-do, they were often exquisite works of art. Imagine receiving a pomander crafted from silver or gold, intricately chased or filigreed, perhaps segmented like an orange. Each segment might have a tiny hinged lid, opening to reveal a different aromatic substance. Some were studded with gemstones like pearls, garnets, or sapphires, making them valuable pieces of jewelry in their own right. They were typically designed to be worn, suspended from a chain around the neck or attached to a girdle, a taillon belt. This way, the wearer could bring it to their nose whenever they encountered an offensive odor or simply wanted to enjoy a pleasant scent. The contents of the pomander were key. Besides ambergris, popular ingredients included musk from the musk deer, civet from the civet cat. Yes, medieval perfumery involved some interesting animal products. Dried flowers like roses and lavender, herbs such as rosemary and mint, and expensive spices like cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg. These ingredients would be ground and mixed often with a binding agent like gum tragacanth or beeswax to form a firm paste or powder that would slowly release its fragrance. The recipes for these aromatic concoctions were sometimes closely guarded secrets. Why was this considered a suitable wedding gift? Firstly, it was an item of luxury and status. The precious metals, gemstones, and rare aromatic ingredients all signified wealth and refinement. Gifting a pomander showed that the giver had taste and means, and it conferred that sense of sophistication onto the recipient. For a bride, it would be a beautiful personal adornment, enhancing her fashionable appearance. Secondly, there was a very practical, though perhaps misguided by modern science, health aspect. In medieval times, the dominant theory of disease transmission was the miasma theory. This held that illnesses like the plague were spread by bad air or foul smells. Therefore, by surrounding oneself with pleasant, strong scents from a pomander, it was believed one could purify the air they breathed and thus ward off sickness. In an era where disease could strike swiftly and fatally, a pomander was seen as a small form of personal protection. Giving one as a wedding gift was a way of wishing the couple good health and a long life together, free from the perils of pestilence. Imagine a newlywed couple embarking on their life together. A beautifully crafted pomander, perhaps a shared gift or one specifically for the bride, would be a constant companion. As she moved through her new home, or visited crowded marketplaces, or attended court, the gentle fragrance emanating from her pomander would be a reminder of the giver's care and a small comfort in a world that could often be overwhelming to the senses. It was an intimate gift, designed to be kept close to the body, offering a personal olfactory sanctuary. The types of scents chosen could also be symbolic. Roses for love, rosemary for remembrance, lavender for devotion. The giver might select specific ingredients known to be favorites of the recipient, or those believed to have particular beneficial properties. The act of preparing the aromatic mixture itself could be an art form, and sometimes the pomander might be gifted empty with a separate selection of rare perfumes or spices for the recipient to fill it with themselves. So, while it might seem like a simple air freshener, a jeweled pomander in medieval times was a complex gift. It was a fashion statement, a health amulet, a token of affection, and a testament to the giver's wealth and thoughtfulness. For a bride or groom setting up their new household, it was a touch of personal luxury and a fragrant shield against the less pleasant realities of medieval life. It was a gift that appealed to the senses while also speaking volumes about social standing and well-wishing. Number 4. The bride's own dagger. Not just for show. When you think of wedding gifts, a sharp, pointy weapon probably doesn't spring to mind. But in medieval Europe, it wasn't entirely unheard of for a bride, especially one from a certain social standing, to receive a dagger as part of her wedding ensemble, or as a distinct gift. This wasn't necessarily because her new husband expected her to go into battle, but these daggers served a mix of practical, symbolic, and status-affirming purposes. Let's be clear, we're not talking about a massive, menacing sword. The daggers gifted to brides were often smaller, more ornate, and designed to be worn as part of her attire. These could be quite beautiful objects. Think hilts made of ivory, polished wood, or even precious metals like silver, sometimes inlaid with gemstones or decorated with enamel. The sheaths, too, could be works of art, crafted from tooled leather, velvet, or metal, and designed to be hung from her girdle, belt. One specific type of dagger sometimes associated with women, and which could have been given as a wedding gift, was the kidney dagger. It was named for the two rounded lobes at the base of the hilt that resembled, well, kidneys. While men certainly used these for self-defense, and as a backup weapon in battle, a smaller, more delicate version could be considered appropriate for a woman of status. Another type might be a Balak dagger, which, despite its rather blunt name, referring to the two globes at the hilt guard, was a common civilian dagger. Or it could be a more general purpose, eating knife that was also decorative enough to be worn. People often carried their own cutlery. So why would a bride receive such a gift? One practical reason was self-defense, though perhaps not in the way we might immediately imagine. While a noblewoman wasn't expected to fend off armed assailants regularly, life in medieval times could be unpredictable. Traveling could be dangerous, and even within a household, disputes or unwelcome advances might occur. A small, readily accessible dagger could offer a measure of personal protection, or at least a deterrent. It was a sign that she was not entirely defenseless. However, the symbolism was often more important than its practical use as a weapon. A dagger could represent her new status and responsibilities. For a woman marrying into a powerful family, possessing a fine dagger could be an emblem of her position within that household. It was an accessory that denoted a certain standing, much like fine jewelry or rich clothing. It signaled that she was a lady of consequence. There's also a theory that these daggers had a connection to honor, particularly female honor. In a society that placed enormous emphasis on a woman's chastity and reputation, a dagger could be seen in some interpretations as a symbolic last resort to protect that honor if threatened. While this is a more dramatic interpretation, the idea of defending one's virtue was a powerful cultural trope. Furthermore, these daggers could be family heirlooms passed down from mother to daughter or commissioned specifically for the wedding. In such cases, the gift was imbued with familial significance connecting the bride to her lineage and the traditions of her new family. The craftsmanship and materials would reflect the wealth and standing of the families involved in the marriage. It's also worth noting that in some contexts, knives and daggers were associated with the act of carving out a new life or household. The dagger, as a tool, could subtly represent the bride's role in managing her new domain, albeit in a more symbolic than literal sense for this particular item. More practically, a beautiful knife was useful. Everyone used knives for eating, and a personal, high-quality knife was a common possession. A bride's gifted dagger might well have served as her personal eating utensil at feasts, another way to display status and refinement. Imagine a bride, dressed in her wedding finery, with a small jeweled dagger hanging from her girdle. It's not brandished aggressively, but it's there, a visible part of her ensemble. It speaks of her family's wealth, her new status, and a certain implicit strength or preparedness. It's a complex symbol, part ornament, part tool, part potential defense. The act of gifting such an item was also significant. If given by her father, it could be a token of his trust in her and a wish for her safety and standing. If from her new husband, it might signify his respect for her and his intention to provide for her in a way that acknowledged her agency, however limited it might be by societal norms. So, the bride's dagger wasn't just a weapon. It was a multifaceted object, rich in potential meanings. It was a marker of social status, a personal accessory, a tool with practical applications, and a symbol intertwined with concepts of honor and protection. While perhaps startling to modern sensibilities as a wedding gift, in the medieval context, it made a certain kind of sense reflecting the values and realities of the time. Number 3. A live bear? Yes, really, a bear. Okay, this one definitely tops the list for gifts you probably wouldn't expect at a modern wedding. But yes, in medieval times, particularly among the very wealthy and powerful aristocracy, gifting exotic or impressive live animals, including bears, was a known if uncommon practice. Forget the crystal vase. Imagine your new father-in-law presenting you with a large, furry, potentially grumpy Bruin. Why on earth would someone give a bear as a wedding present? The primary reason was status and spectacle. Owning exotic animals was a massive display of wealth and power. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of owning a collection of supercars or a private jet. But bears, while native to parts of Europe, were still wild, impressive, and not easily managed. To acquire, transport, house, and feed a bear required significant resources. Gifting one was a way for a king, a powerful duke, or a very rich noble to show off their influence and generosity. It was a gift that could not be ignored. These animals often formed part of a lord's or king's menagerie. Royal menageries were collections of animals, often exotic, kept for entertainment, study of a sort, and as symbols of the ruler's reach and dominion over the natural world. Lions, leopards, elephants, though very rare and incredibly expensive, camels, ostriches, and yes, bears, could all be found in these collections. A wedding, especially a politically important one, was an occasion for grand gestures, and gifting a prize animal to add to a new or existing menagerie was certainly grand. What would the newlyweds do with a bear? Well, it wasn't going to be a house pet cuddling up by the fire. Bears in captivity were often used for entertainment. Bear baiting, a cruel sport where dogs were set upon a tethered bear, was a popular form of amusement for centuries, including the medieval period. While grim by today's standards, it drew large crowds and was considered thrilling. A gifted bear might be destined for such spectacles, adding to the lord's capacity to entertain his guests and subjects. Beyond baiting, a bear was simply an impressive creature to have around. It could be a talking point, a symbol of the wildness that the noble lord, in a sense, controlled. It might be housed in a special enclosure or bear pit within the castle grounds, where people could view it. For a noble couple setting up a new household or consolidating their power, such a gift would add to their prestige and the awe they inspired. There are historical accounts of rulers exchanging animals as diplomatic gifts, and wedding alliances were often deeply political. So, a bear could be part of a larger diplomatic package. For example, King Henry III of England received a polar bear from King Haakon IV of Norway in the 13th century. While not a wedding gift, it illustrates the practice of gifting impressive animals between rulers. It's plausible such gifts could extend to important marital alliances. The polar bear, incidentally, was reportedly allowed to swim and fish in the River Thames, secured by a long chain. The logistics of gifting a bear were considerable. It would need to be transported perhaps in a strong wooden cage by cart or even by ship if it was coming from afar. It would require skilled handlers, bearwards who knew how to manage such a powerful animal. The cost of feeding a bear would also be substantial. These were not casual gifts. Imagine the scene at a wedding feast. Amidst the declarations and other presents, an announcement is made, and then, with considerable commotion, a caged bear is presented. It would certainly be memorable. It's a gift that says, "I am incredibly wealthy and powerful, and I wish to bestow upon you something equally impressive and a little bit dangerous." Of course, not all animal wedding gifts were as dramatic as a bear. More commonly, high-status couples might receive prized hunting dogs like greyhounds or wolfhounds or valuable falcons or hawks for the sport of falconry, which was hugely popular among the nobility. These were also status symbols, but had a more direct practical application in the leisure pursuits of the aristocracy. A fine warhorse for the groom could also be an incredibly valuable and prestigious wedding gift. Compared to these, a bear was on another level of exotic and unusual. While specific documented instances of bears as wedding gifts might be rarer to pinpoint than, say, a piece of jewelry, the general practice of gifting important animals, combined with the symbolic power of such creatures, makes it a fascinating, if slightly terrifying, possibility for a medieval power couple. It was a gift that roared status louder than almost any other. Number 2. A solid silver nutmeg grater, because spices were everything. It might sound incredibly niche, perhaps even a bit boring compared to a live bear, but receiving a solid silver nutmeg grater as a wedding gift in medieval times would have been a sign of serious wealth and sophistication. Because spices, especially exotic ones like nutmeg, were astronomically expensive, and having the dedicated high-quality tools to prepare them was a mark of a truly luxurious household. First, let's understand the value of nutmeg. In the medieval period, nutmeg, along with other spices like cloves, mace, which comes from the same fruit as nutmeg, cinnamon, pepper, and ginger, had to be imported into Europe from distant lands, primarily the Banda Islands in Indonesia, also known as the Spice Islands. The journey was long, perilous, and passed through many hands, each adding to the cost. By the time nutmeg reached a medieval kitchen in England, France, or Germany, it was worth more than its weight in gold, or close to it. It was a luxury commodity on par with silk or precious gems. Owning nutmeg was a status symbol. Using it in your food and drink told your guests that you were wealthy, worldly, and had refined taste. Nutmeg was prized for its warm, aromatic flavor and was used in both sweet and savory dishes, as well as in spiced wines like hippocras, and mulled ale. Beyond its culinary uses, nutmeg, like many spices, was also believed to have medicinal properties. It was thought to aid digestion, act as an aphrodisiac, and even in some circles ward off the plague if carried on one's person, though a pomander was more common for that. Given these beliefs, its value soared even higher. So, if the spice itself was so precious, the tools used to prepare it also needed to reflect that value, especially in a wealthy household. You wouldn't grate your incredibly expensive nutmeg with just any old piece of rough metal. A dedicated nutmeg grater, crafted from silver, was the appropriate utensil for such a prized ingredient. Silver was, of course, a precious metal in its own right. It was beautiful, durable, and didn't tarnish as quickly as baser metals. A silversmith would craft these graters with care, sometimes adding decorative elements like engraved patterns, family initials, or small flourishes that made them unique and aesthetically pleasing. Imagine a bride receiving such a gift. It might be a small, elegant object, perhaps fitting neatly into the palm of her hand. The grater itself would have a section with small, sharp holes or rasps against which the hard nutmeg kernel would be rubbed, producing a fine powder. Some graters were designed with a small compartment to store the nutmeg kernel, keeping it safe and fresh. This wasn't just a kitchen tool. It was an item that would be brought out, perhaps even at the table, to freshly grate nutmeg over a dish or into a cup of wine, allowing the diners to enjoy the full aroma and demonstrating the host's affluence. Why, as a wedding gift. A silver nutmeg grater symbolized the establishment of a prosperous new household. It was a wish for the couple to enjoy the finer things in life, to be able to afford and appreciate luxury. It suggested that their table would be well laden, their hospitality generous, and their life together seasoned with good taste and good fortune. For a bride, it could also be seen as a contribution to her role in managing a sophisticated household, where the quality of the food and drinks served was a reflection of the family's status. Such a gift would likely come from a wealthy relative or a close family friend of similar social standing. It was an intimate gift in the sense that it related to the domestic sphere, but its material value and symbolic implications were public declarations of status. It was a way of saying, this new couple belongs to a certain echelon of society. Consider the broader context of feasting in medieval times. Banquets were elaborate affairs, especially for weddings designed to impress guests with the variety and richness of the food. Spices were crucial to this display. Dishes were often heavily spiced, not just for flavor but to showcase the host's ability to afford these rare ingredients. A silver nutmeg grater was part of this culture of culinary display. So, while it might not have the immediate shock value of a bear, a silver nutmeg grater was a gift of considerable significance. It represented luxury, health, status, and the sophisticated pleasures of a well-appointed home. It was a testament to the incredible value placed on spices in the medieval world and a beautiful, practical, and precious token to wish a newlywed couple a prosperous and flavorful life together. It was a small object that spoke volumes about wealth and refinement. Number 1. A tiny book for your belt. The ultimate status symbol. In an age before Kindles, sap cakes, or even widespread printing, a book was a rare and precious object. But imagine a book so small, so personal, and so exquisitely made that it was designed to be worn hanging from your belt like a piece of jewelry. This was the girdle book, and receiving one as a wedding gift, especially in the later Middle Ages, roughly 14th to 16th centuries, would have been an incredible mark of status, piety, and learning. It was, in many ways, the ultimate medieval accessory for the literate elite. What exactly was a girdle book? It was a small portable book whose leather or fabric binding extended beyond the covers at the bottom, gathered into a knot or loop. This tail-like extension could then be tucked into one's girdle, belt, or hung from it, allowing the book to be carried hands-free, often upside down so it could be easily swung up and read. The books themselves were typically small in format, making them light and convenient to carry. The contents of these girdle books were usually religious texts. Books of hours were particularly popular choices. A book of hours was a personal prayer book containing a collection of prayers, psalms, and devotional readings set out for the canonical hours of the day. They were often lavishly illustrated with miniature paintings, known as illuminations, featuring vibrant colors and gold leaf. Other common texts for girdle books included psalters, collections of psalms, or other devotional works. Why was a girdle book such an extraordinary wedding gift? Firstly, literacy itself was not universal. While literacy rates were rising in the later Middle Ages, especially among the nobility, clergy, and merchant classes, owning a book, let alone being able to read it, was still a sign of education and privilege. To give a book was to acknowledge and celebrate the recipient's learning or to encourage their devotional practice. Secondly, books were handmade and incredibly expensive. Each page was usually made of parchment, animal skin, and the text was painstakingly copied by hand by a scribe. If it was an illuminated manuscript, artists would then add the intricate decorations and miniature paintings. The binding itself could be a work of art, made of fine leather, sometimes tooled with intricate patterns or even covered in velvet or silk, and perhaps adorned with clasps of silver or gold. A girdle book, though small, represented many hours of skilled labor and valuable materials. Gifting one was a significant financial gesture. For a bride or groom, a girdle book was a deeply personal and pious gift. It was intended for their private devotion, a way to carry their faith with them literally. In an era where religion permeated every aspect of life, such a gift would have been seen as a blessing upon the marriage, encouraging the couple to lead a devout life. The act of wearing the book visibly on one's person was also a public declaration of one's faith and social standing. It was a subtle but clear signal. I am literate, I am pious, and I am wealthy enough to own such a treasure. Imagine a noble bride receiving a beautifully illuminated book of hours as a girdle book. The rich colors of the paintings, the gleam of gold leaf on the page, the soft feel of the vellum, and the scent of old parchment and leather. It would have been a multi-sensory treasure. As she wore it hanging from her elaborate girdle, it would be both a tool for her spiritual life and an elegant accessory that complemented her fine attire. It might be a gift from her new husband, symbolizing their shared faith, or from her parents, a reminder of the religious upbringing she was taking into her new life. These books were also seen as objects of status because they connected the owner to a wider world of learning and culture. They were fashionable among the aristocracy and the wealthy merchant class across Europe. Portraits from the period sometimes depict men and women wearing girdle books, indicating their importance as status symbols. They were the medieval equivalent of having the latest, most sought-after tech gadget combined with the gravitas of a sacred object. The intimacy of a girdle book also made it a special gift. Unlike a large lectern Bible intended for a church or a family chapel, a girdle book was for personal use and contemplation. It was something to be held, read, and cherished individually. For a newlywed, it could represent a space for personal reflection amidst the duties and social obligations of married life. While the advent of printing in the mid-15th century eventually made books more accessible and less expensive, handwritten and illuminated girdle books continued to be prized possessions for some time, especially as bespoke luxury items. They represented a pinnacle of medieval craftsmanship and personal devotion. Receiving one as a wedding gift was more than just getting a book. It was receiving a portable treasure, a symbol of faith, education, wealth, and sophisticated taste, all wrapped up in one tiny wearable package. It was a profound statement about the kind of life the couple was expected to lead and the values they were to uphold.